Morning, everybody. Happy Saturday morning. It's a little autumnal here in Florida for whatever that means. That doesn't mean much if you're up in the Northeast where it gets cold and the leaves change colors. We don't get that part. But it's always a fun time to snuggle in, stay in your jammies, and get a great story. And our story today is Stitch by Stitch. Elizabeth Hobbs Keckly sews her way to freedom. If you can see from the cover, this is an amazing story that is not told, at least to me, very often, and certainly not for children. And I think it's an important one. And we have the author, Connie Schoefield-Morrison, and the illustrator, Elizabeth Zunon, and they're both here, and they're going to talk about the story and how they created the words and the pictures that just illustrated perfectly, and why they picked this particular subject that I find so compelling. And I'm going to go away because nobody came to hear me talk. You came to see our wonderful authors and illustrators. So thank you for joining us, and thank you both so much. I, wish for better times in the future and invite you to come to the BookMark and to the beach and let us host you appropriately with all the fineries that we can pull out for you. So, but for now, thank you, and I'm going to stick around because I'm going to hold up the book and the pictures while they talk, so they can concentrate on you and the story, and I just can be the prop person. So, thank you. Let's get going.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm author Connie Schoefield-Morrison, and I authored the book Stitch by Stitch. And today I will be reading a story. And Elizabeth Zunon she's the illustrator, and she created all the wonderful masterpieces that are in the book. And I'll let her tell the detail of how she created her illustrations. Liz?
Thank you, Connie. Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Zunon. I'm the illustrator of this book. I love working on picture book biographies. That's my absolute favorite type of book because I feel like I really get to know a person, a historical figure that I really didn't know about before. So I was so excited to illustrate this book. I love drawing, but my favorite thing to do is actually paint. So every illustration in this book I created with paint, with collage, which are pieces of paper cut into different shapes and glued onto my painting. And also, for the first time in this book, I use some sewing. I use some needle and thread, I use embroidery, and I also used a lot of fabric that I folded and sewed together so that they would look like beautiful, voluminous skirts on dresses. And I glued those pieces of fabric also onto my painting. So it's a very mixed media type of artwork for this book.
Awesome. So I'll read the book, and then we'll leave it open at the end for Q&A. So here goes. Stitch by Stitch. Elizabeth Hobbs Keckly sews her way to freedom. Elizabeth Hobbs Keckly was born in February 1818. She wrote her autobiography. My life has been an eventful one. I was born a slave, was the child of slave parents. Therefore, I came upon the earth free of godlike thought, but feathered in action. My birthplace was Denwood Courthouse in Virginia. Lizzie's father was George Pleasant Hobbs. Her mother name was Agnes, and she was known as Aggie. Lizzie and her mother were the property of Irma Star Burwell. Lizzie's mother was a seamstress for the entire Burwell household. Though the law forbade enslaved persons to be educated, Aggie knew how to read and write. Lizzie also learned how to read and write, and she learned how to sew stitch by stitch. Lizzie remembered being put to work at the age of 4. She was taking care of the Burwell baby when the baby fell out of her cradle. Lizzie was severely beaten. Later, Lizzie, like her mother, became a seamstress. In Lizzie's words, my mother was kind and forbearing, and as mother had so much work to do in making clothes, etc., for the family, besides the slaves, I determined to render her all the assistance in my power. Lizzie helped her mother stitch by stitch. At about the age of 7, Lizzie witnessed the auction of an enslaved child, Little Joe, the cook's son. Master had just purchased his hogs for the winter for which he was unable to pay in full. Little Joe came in with a bright face and was placed in a scale and was sold like the hogs, so much per pound. His mother was whipped for grieving for her lost boy. Burwell never liked to see one of his slaves wear a sorrowful face, and those who offended in this particular way were always punished. At last, the sunny face of the slave is not always an indication of sunshine in the heart. Though Lizzie worked hard, she became under much criticism by Burwell. In Lizzie's words, I grew strong and healthy, and notwithstanding, I knit socks and attended to various kinds of work. I was repeatedly told, when even 14 years old, that I would never be worth my salt. Lizzie knitted socks, stitch by stitch. Soon after, Burwell sent her to live with his eldest son, Robert, and Robert's wife, Anna. In Lizzie's words, I was their only servant. For the very first, from the very first, I did the work of 3 servants, and yet I was scolded and regarded with mistrust. While living with Robert and Anna Burwell, Lizzie was brutally beaten. Eventually, she went to live with Robert's sister, Ann Burwell Garland, and her husband, Hugh Garland, first in Virginia and then in St. Louis, Missouri. By that time, Lizzie had a son. Mr. Garland was poor, so Lizzie offered to look for work to support his family. In Lizzie's words, I was fortunate to obtain in work, and in a short time, I had acquired something of a reputation as a seamstress and dressmaker. The best ladies in St. Louis were my patrons, and when my reputation was once established, I never looked for orders. With my needle, I kept bread in the mouths of 17 persons for 2 years and 5 months, stitch by stitch. Today, most women buy dresses from a store or online. The dresses are made by designers, pattern makers, cutters, machine operators, and finishers. Hundreds of dresses in dozens of sizes are made in each style. But when Lizzie lived, a dressmaker would drape a cloth on a patron's body and use the cloth to make a pattern. Either the dressmaker, or the patron would buy fabric and trimmings. Then the dressmaker would sew the dress. Each was one of a kind and required many hours of work. St. Louis was a city with communities of free African Americans. While Lizzie lived there, her desire for freedom grew. She made the request to Mr. Garland. In Lizzie's words, I made a proposition to buy myself and my son. The proposition was bluntly declined, and I was commanded never to broach the subject again. I would not put off, thus, for hope pointed to a freer, brighter life in the future. Why should my son be held in slavery? I often ask myself. Eventually, Mr. Garland, who was in much debt, relented and said he would take $1,200 for Lizzie and her son. Shortly after Mr. Garland agreed to give Lizzie her freedom, she married James Keckly. In Lizzie's words, the day was a happy one, but it faded all too soon. Mr. Keckly, let me speak kindly of his faults, proved dissipated and a burden instead of a helpmate. Meanwhile, raising $1,200 proved to be very difficult. In Lizzie's words, I went to work in earnest to purchase my freedom, but the years passed and I was still a slave. Mr. Garland's family claimed so much of my attention. In fact, I supported them stitch by stitch. One day, a carriage stopped in front of Lizzie's house. In Lizzie's words, Miss Lee Bourget, one of my kind patrons, got out of it and entered the door. You have many friends in St. Louis, and I am going to raise the $1,200 required among them. The $1,200 was raised, and at last my son and myself were free. Yes, free, free, free. By the laws of man and the smile of God. That was November 15, 1855. Lizzie agreed to receive the money from her patrons under the condition that she would repay them stitch by stitch. I went to work to earnest and in a short time paid every cent that was so kindly advanced by my lady patrons of St. Louis. In spring of 1860, her debt paid, Lizzie decided to leave St. Louis and move to Washington, D.C. It was a time of great tension in the United States. The northern states and the southern states had irreconcilable differences and were preparing for war. One of the differences was that the South wanted to keep slavery and the North wanted to abolish it. At the time of Lizzie's arrival, Washington, D.C. was the home to leaders from both sides. Lizzie's beautiful work caught the attention of their wives. One of Lizzie's clients, Miss Verena Davis, wife of Senator Jeffrey Davis, would become president of the Confederacy the following year. Another client was Mary Anna Curtis Lee, wife of Robert E. Lee, the future commander of the Confederate Army. Miss Lee needed a new dress. When Lizzie called on Miss Lee, her husband, who was in the room, gave Lizzie $100 to buy trimmings. In Lizzie's words, with the money in my pocket, I went out into the street, into the store of Harper and Mitchell, and asked to look at their laces. When I asked permission to carry the laces to Miss Lee in order to learn whether she could approve my selection or not, he gave me a ready assent. When I reminded him that I was a stranger and that the goods were valuable, he remarked that he was so afraid to trust me that he was not afraid to trust me, that he believed my face was the index to an honest heart. It was pleasant to be spoken to thus, and I shall never forget the kind words of Mr. Harper. Miss Lee's dress was for a party given in honor of the Prince of Wales, and Miss Lee had been in a state bordering of excitement over what she would wear. Lizzie began to sew the dress, stitch by stitch. Stitch by stitch, the dress was done in time and gave complete satisfaction. Miss Lee attracted great attention at the dinner party, and her elegant dress proved a good card for me. I received numerous orders. Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th President of the United States on March 4th, 1861. Hearing that Lizzie sold for Verena Davis, Miss Lincoln was eager to hire Lizzie too. Miss L came forward and greeted me warmly. You have come at last. Miss Lincoln had purchased bright rose-colored, more antique fabric wanted Lizzie to make a dress from it. Lizzie measured Miss Lincoln and returned to the White House the next day to fit her. When Lizzie delivered the dress on the night of the inauguration party, Miss Lincoln insisted she had enough time and refused to dress her guests. Her sister and her cousin were finally able to persuade Miss Lincoln to let Lizzie dress her. Laughing and quoting poetry, the president entered the room, threw himself on the couch, and said, I declare, you look charming in that dress. Miss Keckly has met with great success. Miss Lincoln's dress was much admired at the party, and Lizzie became the First Lady's regular dressmaker, sewing at least 15 dresses over the next 2 seasons, stitch by stitch. The women became friends. They supported each other through times of great tragedy, the death of Lizzie's son George in a Civil War battle, the illness and death of Miss Lincoln's son Willie, and the assassination of the president. More bad times followed as Miss Lincoln became impoverished and outcast. Few people other than Lizzie remained loyal, and eventually the friendship between Mary and Lizzie became strained as well. Over the years, Lizzie became acquainted with many prominent people. She used her connections to bring awareness to the plight of newly liberated African Americans. In the mid 1800s, approximately 10,000 formerly enslaved men and women had reached the nation's capital. Though they had secured their freedom, many struggled to survive and were forced to live in makeshift camps and tenements. In 1862, Lizzie helped found the Ladies Contraband Relief Association, which provided food, shelter, and clothing. She served as the association's president, rallied support for their efforts. Lizzie collected contributions from well-to-do African Americans, President Lincoln and President Lincoln and the First Lady, and abolitionist luminaries including Wendell Phillips, Leonard Grimes, and Frederick Douglass. Lizzie also created opportunities for many African American women. By 1865, she employed almost 20 women in her 12th Street dress shop. An author as well as an historian, Lizzie wrote a memoir, Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House, published in 1868. She wrote about slavery, the White House, and the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, word by word. The aftermath proved a great hardship for Lizzie. A reliever for the New York Times criticized the book for gross violations and confidence. An opinion that was widespread, and upon reading the book, Mary Lincoln ended her friendship with Lizzie. In 1892, at the age of 74, Lizzie was offered a position as the head of sewing and domestic science arts at Wilberforce University in Xenia, Ohio. At the university, she continued sewing and teaching young women the same techniques her mother had taught her as a girl. In the late 1890s, Lizzie returned to Washington, D.C., lived in the National Home for Destitute Colored Women and Children, an institution she helped create. In May 1907, she died in her sleep after an extraordinary, accomplished, and compassionate life. Elizabeth Keckly's legacy lives on in her words, her achievements, her dresses, and in the many stitches of her life's work, stitch by stitch.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you. So, what compelled you all to pick this woman to write this book about?
Okay, I'll start. So, I have out-of-body experiences. I have had quite a few since being knocked into a coma at the age of 9. Elizabeth came to me some years ago in a dream, and I was attracted to her fashion. In a dream, I was at a fashion event with my oldest son. He's a celebrity fashion stylist and has his own brand. So he's stitch by stitch every day. And so I noticed in the dream Elizabeth's clothes didn't match mine. She had on this beautiful big bouffant dress, which in our time we would wear as a wedding dress or to a prom or a special event. And I waited for the right opportunity to approach Lizzie, which was during a time she was going to the dessert table and the drink table. So I kind of followed her and asked her, was she going to be presenting at the event? And her first response to me was, I reckon. And so right off the bat, I thought maybe she's from another country. That wasn't a word that I was accustomed to hearing in that manner. And, I noticed how I spoke was totally different than the way she spoke. So I questioned her about, her dress. And a few other things, and she was quite outspoken. She started telling me about her life. And so even today, if something is said to me and it don't make sense, I don't comprehend it. Like, I have a sense of humor, but I'm not one to laugh at crazy things. I just don't get it. And so when she explained her life story, that she was a slave, millionaire, purchased her own freedom, best friends with Mary Todd Lincoln and confidant, also friends with Frederick Douglass, like close friends with Frederick Douglass. None of that made sense to me, because how could you be a slave, purchase your freedom? You were invited in the White House as a guest, best friends with the president's wife. I never heard about you. And also, Frederick Douglass, I've heard about him since I was a little girl. I never heard about his friend, Elizabeth Keckly. And so I knew, because I kind of know when I'm having these out of body experiences, I knew this was something that I needed for my life. I just didn't know how things was going to turn. And so when I do have these out of body experiences, I wake my husband up to write things down, because when I fully wake from the dream, I'm extremely tired for sometimes for a couple of days. And I don't remember everything. And so I'm able to actually tell the story now because of the things he wrote down. And then, it helped me remember. But after awakening from the dream, my husband had already looked her up. My oldest daughter looked her up. They knew she was real and that her story was true. I didn't want to approach the situation because I knew in my spirit, but I guess I didn't want to know in reality. So it took me about 3 days before I got up the nerve to look her up and realize this lady is real. And so I purchased her book, read the book. I still read the book. I'm still learning day by day why she chose me. Um, and even down to Lizzie. Lizzie's heard me say this before. When I didn't get to see anything as far as illustrations until the book was completed. And so we had a Zoom call with the publishing house, which is not typical for an author and an illustrator to meet. I just happened to meet my husband because we're in the same house. But when I heard Elizabeth's name, I actually cried, because I'm like, is this some type of joke? Like, she's really coming through people now. Like, I didn't know how to think. And so I just felt like this was all being orchestrated by Elizabeth Keckly. And when I heard my agent call Elizabeth Liz, I was like, oh wow, this is like for real, for real. And so it's been amazing. And actually, I could share this. The other day, I had a scare. I just had this urge to finally read the book to my daughters. One is 24 and my baby is 10. And halfway through the book, my 24-year-old is like, Mom. Actually, when I got to the point of her purchasing her freedom, she's like, Mom, that's today. I'm like, what? She's like, today is November 15th. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is, I just started saying, okay, Liz, if you're in the room, you can leave the building. Like, not today. I'm not ready for this. But I've just been still experiencing some moments that's like unheard of with this book. So that's how I came into writing a book.
Wow.
So I'm going to pass it over to
That was not
Liz.
an answer I expected. But thank you for, sharing that gift with the rest of us, because that was the gift given specifically to you. And we're all just very fortunate that you were willing and able to share it with you. So Liz, is this a woman that you had ever heard about before you talked to Connie?
No, I'd never heard of Elizabeth Keckly before. And the way I came about this project was I was presented with Connie's beautiful manuscript from our agent, Lori Nowicki. So I never spoke to Connie at any process during the illustration of this book, which is, as you may know, pretty normal in the publishing world. The author and the illustrator are kept kind of separate unless they, know each other from the beginning and conceptualize of the story or the book together from the beginning. But when I read her manuscript, I was just, first of all, I was so impressed by the achievements of Elizabeth Keckly. And then I was mad that I had never heard about her before.
Yeah.
I've heard of, everybody knows Abraham Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. And I just thought I really need to learn more about this important historical figure so that I could honor her in every way that I can by illustrating this book. And I thought, I have to illustrate this book. Her name is Elizabeth, just like me. They call her Lizzie, just like me. My family calls me Lizzie. She loves fashion and creativity, and she's a hard worker, I like to say, just like me. So I feel like we are kind of soul sisters in that way. We have a lot of things in common. And I was also really excited about this book because I'm very interested in fashion. I'm interested in sewing and embroidery, but I've never been able to really use those skills in my picture book illustrations before. I love painting and I love paper collage, and I often work in those mediums. But sometimes I want to add a little bit something more, a little bit, a sprinkle of something extra special that is very specific to the life of the person whose story I'm illustrating. So I thought I can definitely use sewing and fabric and embroidery in trying to tell Elizabeth Keckly's story. So in doing some of the research, I read her autobiography, as Connie mentioned, was a great jumping off point for learning about her life. I learned that in her time, when seamstresses made dresses, they didn't, today when we buy a dress, there's a label on the inside that says the name of the company or whoever made it. It wasn't so in the 1850s and 60s. So there are many dresses that are known to be attributed to her, but none of these dresses really have labels with her name or her information in them. So I had to kind of imagine what the dresses that she was making might have looked like based on old photographs from the time and other dresses from the time that have survived. So it was really a really interesting learning experience, combining my love of art, but also trying to make something look three-dimensional on the page and not just like a flat piece of paper pasted on a flat background, but an actual voluminous dress, because she would have used, layers of fabric and petticoats and all of these layered materials to make these beautiful dresses that we think of when we think of, the 1850s.
Well, I think both the illustrations and even the illustrations on the pages that are text really evoke the time period. So, kudos for that, because that was amazing. Is this normal for you to have to do historical research before you do illustrations for a book?
Yeah, especially if it's a book about a real person. I feel that I definitely owe that to the person that I'm illustrating the book about, and also owe that to the readers to make sure that the author will definitely have done their research if they're writing a manuscript. Therefore, the illustrator has to put in a huge amount of research as well, so that the research that the author did comes through in the artwork. I have to reflect what the author does on the page, but I also have to add my own skill, which is art, on the page. So I love doing the research. It takes me back to the times of being in school and writing research papers, which I always loved, gathering all the different pieces of information from various sources and then putting them together in one piece, rather than writing, a research paper. Now I create individual art pieces.
So were your first images of what these illustrations look like, did they comport with the story? Did y'all get along on those choices?
Yeah, the first images that I created after doing the research were just pencil sketches. So I scanned those and I emailed those to the art director and the editor. So they look at my sketches and make sure, people's bodies are rendered correctly, or if the text mentions something very important that the author wants reflected in the art, they have to make sure that I reflect that in my sketch. But I'm not sure if Connie ever saw any of my sketches. I think she mentioned that the first time she saw the artwork was when it was totally finished. So I had to work with the editors and make sure that the art that I was going to create at the end would reflect the sketches and also reflect the text that Connie had created.
And were you happy with them when you saw them, Connie?
Yes. Yes, I was. I knew I couldn't like post them yet or show them, Holiday House wanted us to kind of wait, but I just wanted to show the world, like, look what Elizabeth Zunon did. Like, this is so amazing. She actually made the dresses, and me being into fashion and just seeing how my son is with materials, I knew that, okay, Elizabeth, or I call you Liz. Well, Liz didn't just paint that. That's something she actually made these little dresses.
Yeah.
So I told my 10-year-old, I'm like, look what Miss Liz did. She's like, oh, Mom, we could get those for the Barbies. And I'm like, yes, we could get those. We could get those for the Barbies. But
you could get them for yourself. They're quite lovely.
Look, don't give me no ideas, and then I'll be emailing Liz like, Liz, actually, I am turning 50 in December.
Happy almost birthday.
Thank you. I'm trying to decide if I want a party. So I'm like, okay, Liz can make a dress. But yeah, those are just dreams.
I think you should pick one of the dresses from the book and wear it to your 50th birthday party. I think that would be very appropriate.
The pink one. The pink one.
Okay, the pink. You heard it. We're here for the inspiration. The pink one.
All right.
This book that it's funny because you answered my other question, which was, did you learn about this woman in school? And apparently no. And I think that the greatest gift of this book is to get her story out there, because it's such a universal story of a time that kids, it's more personal than just, history, learning the dates. Well, there was a war and, we fought over this and that and people died. And this is very personal, and the pictures are very personal. And the idea of, selling a child and watching a mother reach to save their child, those are all things that I think need to be told. And thank you for making that opportunity available for the schools to share with children. That's just fantastic. Before I let you go, I want to ask you both what you're up to next. So we'll start with Connie and let Liz finish up, since she's now thinking about how she's going to sew that dress. She needs some time to ponder that before we put her back on the spot. So what's your next project that you can talk about, Connie?
Okay, so my next project is actually next Thursday. I'm launching my website. I have a cosmetic brand. It's called Icon Beauty by Connie Morrison. And the website will be iconmorrison.com. And on the book side of things, I'm working on a book series with Bloomsbury Publishing. It's a little African-American little boy, but he has a universe of friends, all nationalities. And it's a happy book. It's a happy book for little boys to grow up and view life in a happy way. Even if their realities are not so good, these books will teach them how to gather the happiness from the inside and bring it out.
Great.
And I'm also working on my second history book, which I can't really give the details.
Yeah, all these secrets.
And that's it.
Well, they're very tantalizing, so that's good. It makes us sit and wait to see what the big reveal and the big surprise is. But I do want pictures from your 50th birthday party. So, Liz, what are you working on these days?
I am currently finishing up the illustrations for the third book in a series about a toddler who is a little bit mischievous. In this particular book, the toddler is playing at playtime. So this book explores all the different ways that you can play in all 4 seasons in different environments. So that's a series written by Nikki Grimes. The first book was about bedtime. The second book was about bath time. So this is about playtime. So I'm working on finishing up my paintings and my collage illustrations for that book.
How wonderful. Well, we look forward to getting more wonderful treats from both of you. And I look forward to when life is saner and safer, and we can invite y'all to come to Neptune Beach and the BookMark and, see the ocean and the beach and enjoy our hospitality. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we look forward to everybody seeing this and sharing this wonderful story. So thank you. Y'all have a wonderful morning and the rest of the day and a happy holiday season. So thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.